Your attachment styles are foundational to the development of your self-talk. This ability to talk to ourselves, to have thoughts about what we're doing, to, fast forward to the future, go back into the past. It's what has led us to the top of the food chain. It's both our greatest achievement and our biggest downfall, right? How do we shift that self-talk? How do we change our brain's operating system? Well, it's really through acknowledging the pains and the hurts and the unmet needs in your childhood and finding a way for your adult self to start to give that to your child self. This is not a new psychological concept, but I think it's been misunderstood and also underutilized.
All right, welcome back to the Better Human podcast. As usual, we usually try to bring you amazing guests. And today we have one of the best when it comes down to this whole concept of attachment theory, which has been quite popular lately and helps us understand a little more around either why we are successful in our relationships or completely dysfunctional. Today we have Dr. Judy Ho, who is a triple board certified licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. Besides being that, she's a tenured associate professor at Pepperdine University, and her original book was called Stop the Self-Sabotage. Besides being an author, a professor, and a neuropsychologist, she is also an avid researcher, and she is often called by the media as an expert psychologist and brought in as a speaker to different universities, businesses, and organizations. In fact, maybe some of you have even been graced by being able to see one of her keynotes. Her latest book is called The New Rules of Attachment, which is grounded in the science of attachment and offers a completely new approach that teaches us how to change our anxious, avoidant, or even disorganized attachment style in our relationships, our friendships, our work, and even when it comes down to goal setting, and most of all, our sense of self. Dr. Judy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Greg. We're really excited for our conversation and love the work that you're doing. So thanks for having me on your show.
Amazing. Well, as you know, it's all about being better human, and being a better human begins with ourselves, right? And the more we understand about sometimes our patterns and our behaviors and where this all comes from. I mean, a lot of the work I do around leadership, which I was sharing earlier, begins with that conversation, which is self. Right. And in the world, we like to blame and we like to sort of find fault in others. But at the end of the day, it really begins with us. And this is where the whole concept of the science of attachment kicks in. So for the audience, why don't we break down what the concept is and then what the different attachment styles are. And we could talk about how do we manage them, or if we're dealing with them, how do we navigate those people as well?
Yeah, definitely. So attachment goes back to the most important and early bonds that we have with other human beings when we're born. And it's essential that we start from those first early days of life to connect with somebody, at least one other person, who is going to help us meet our needs, because as mammals and as humans, we are born pretty much helpless. We don't have the tools or the skills or the development to survive. And we have to rely on people around us. And that's why during this very crucial time of brain development and imprinting, we're learning so many different things about ourselves. We're learning who we are in the world, what happens when we call for help, how the people around us respond. And ultimately, that goes into the foundation of what you believe about yourself, your self-concept, and also whether or not you believe you can have loving and symbiotic relationships with other people, and ultimately, whether you deserve good outcomes in life in various areas of your life.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this really stamped in us, like our personality in our formative years, or is this kind of fluid where, like, as we're going through our experiences when it comes down to relationships, depending on the effect of those relationships, can now start to create a dysfunctional or a disorganized type of attachment style versus a secured attachment style?
Well, I definitely think that there's an interaction between our temperament, which is those early roots of personality that are already emerging in our first days of life. Some babies are a little bit more outgoing than other babies. Some babies are just a little bit more shy than other babies. That's what we call temperament. And of course, then through various interactions, our personality gets shaped further. So if you're a relatively outgoing baby, you're probably drawing more of that social interaction from others as well. And so for most people, they become more and more outgoing probably as a result, especially when the people around them are responding to that type of temperament. But given how your primary caregivers respond to you in various ways, that also interacts with some of your biology to create certain patterns. Some of these patterns are serving us, are helpful for us. Other patterns may not actually help us, especially as we get older, but they developed out of a sense of trying to survive that moment. So if you have for example, as a child, a parent who's kind of dismissive and not really available. Well, your survival technique as a child might be to try your best to do all of your own things by yourself, to kind of grow up a little bit too fast, and also to not ask for support anymore because you don't really expect to get it, right? So during that time, it's helping you cope. But then as an adult, that might create more dysfunction in your life.
Right. I was thinking about this. Are we seeing a rise of the disorganized, or in quotations, dysfunctional patterns? So just when it comes down to, let's say the last 20, 30 years, specifically in how parenting has now changed and how our relationships have now changed with our kids. I mean, we might argue that most parents, it's hard for them to be present with their kids 100% because there is so many distractions. And then and that's not even talking about the stresses that people are carrying and going through.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would say that, modern technology and the fact that so many things are grabbing our attention, that's definitely affected parenting to some degree because we just don't have the ability to be as mindful in a more easy way than maybe decades ago, where, there was only 3 channels on TV and you didn't have social media. And when you're watching TV, you don't also have a ticker running on the bottom of your news channel saying, go watch this other thing and go check out this. It's just too much, right? It's splitting our attention. It's causing us to all have a little bit of inattention. And I think that definitely impacts our parenting styles. I also would say, though, that conversely, there's been more attention too on self-development. Our younger generations now are more attuned to their feelings, and they talk about mental health a lot more readily than, for example, people who are in my parents' age, right? And so there's kind of a balance. So I think the balance, though, can create some dissonance, right? You have the younger generation recognizing the importance of mental health and how much they should be paying attention to it, but then you have these other things, modern technology potentially wreaking havoc on your mental health. So that idea of, oh man, I'm really missing something here and this is really hurting me, that acknowledgement is so much more real now for our younger generations now versus decades ago, where people may not even have been having these conversations about their mental wellness.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even a conversation. I mean, that's the truth to that, right? It was not discussed. It was, deal with what you need to deal with and bottle it up. And, I talk a lot about this with guys, which is one of the ways people have learned how to cope is with that internalizing, right? The internalizing of a stress and emotion. And, the question is where does it go? And if it doesn't come out, it starts to now manifest and actually, impact us in more of a negative way. Today, we might even argue to that point, which is we're over-indexed in the expression of our feelings and our needs and, what parents have come through. So it'd be interesting to see specifically the anxious attachment style, what that looks like over the next several years as people start to mature and come into their new adult relationships, right? So let's break it down for the audience. So we know what the attachment science is. What are the different attachment styles?
Yeah, so there's 4 different attachment styles, and there's 1 secure and 3 insecure. So the secure attachment, these people, they generally feel comfortable with intimacy and autonomy in their relationships. They tend to have a positive view of themselves. They tend to trust their partners and effectively communicate their needs most of the time. They can also regulate their emotions either by themselves or with another person present. They seek support when they need it, and they tend to maintain healthy boundaries. Generally, they're confident. They have a strong foundation of trust and security in themselves, as well as the people they choose to be in relationship with. There's 3 forms of insecure attachment. The first one is anxious attachment. These individuals often fear rejection and abandonment, and they might seek excessive reassurance from people in their life so that they can feel more secure about their worthiness, about their abilities to move forward in different areas of life. And they tend to be really sensitive to changes in their relationship and sometimes can exhibit clinging behavior, even codependent behavior, and experience high levels of anxiety when separated from their caregivers. Overall, their self-esteem isn't really intact unless they get that validation from their environment. And that's a big part of the defining feature of anxious attachment.
Now, I'm curious because what creates that? Is it the over-loving, protective parents that is oohing over their child on everything? Or is it the parent that is not around, that did not give them the attention, that, they seeked out love and connection and the parent was absent?
Yeah, these are great questions. And, specifically for the anxious attachment style, this may have developed from caregivers who were inconsistently responsive. So that can lead a child to develop anxiety, right? Like, well, when am I going to get my needs met and when am I not? And what parent am I stepping into when they come home? So I've had a lot of patients tell me, people who have developed anxious attachment, I didn't really know what was coming through the door every day, right? I could either get my dad who's like super excited, he's whistling, he's happy, or I can get the version of my dad who's temperamental and pissed off. And, I don't know what I'm getting on a given day and I have no idea what to do to manage that, right? So that inconsistency can cause anxious attachment. Also, kind of the two sides of the spectrum, either like the really super, super overprotective, overbearing parent, or the one that just doesn't seem to care at all. It's like that's going to cause anxiousness. But also, if you have a really overbearing, overprotective parent, what is the lesson that you're imparting on your child? Oh, okay, well, the world is something to be feared, right? And so that's going to go into your own adult development. And I think just modeling as well, when you look at a parent and maybe they seem anxious and can't manage their own distress, that causes you to feel that same kind of anxiousness. Like, well, if my own mom and dad, who was basically my hero when I'm 3 years old, 5 years old, can't do it, then how am I ever going to do it? So yeah.
Interesting. You just triggered a memory in me, which not a memory, but a thought, which is that was my father. You never knew which dad was coming home. And it was more like whether he was pissed off or whether he wasn't going to freak out. But you learn to walk on eggshells a little bit. And, as I thought about that, I would define myself today, not just because I want to be positive, but, someone that operates with secure attachment in my relationships, whether it's family, friends, my spouse, my wife, my kids. Even though we've gone through those experiences, we can still end up, as you said, developing those core skills: emotional regulation, communication skills, confidence, being able to sort of express and articulate your needs, therefore building a confidence. So in quotations, even though we might have had a little bit of an effed up upbringing, doesn't mean that we're going to end up in one of these more negative attachment states. It's about skills being developed that allow us to move into that secure attachment. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because essentially you're a model for people who are saying, well, can I really do this? Like, absolutely you can. And it's also about knowing that for the most part, a lot of people, especially when they have self-awareness, they're going to probably be operating in secure attachment at least 60 or 70% of the time in life. But maybe that 20 to 30%, maybe there's something there that's getting them stuck. And it might just be in one or two areas of life. Maybe they have these really supportive, awesome relationships with their friends and even with their family now, but with romantic relationships or just with their career, those shadows of their insecure attachment show up. Or in general, you're operating with secure attachment, but maybe certain situations might still get you stuck. Like you're in a new, novel, challenging situation and you see your old attachment style starting to creep up a bit. And I would say that, even though just like you, I have a secure attachment style now pretty much mostly in most situations and most of the time in my life, I do notice that when I'm under a lot of stress, I still have certain shadows of my avoidant attachment style where I just want to go into myself. I don't want to talk to anybody. I kind of just want to isolate and deal with it myself, right? Instead of reaching out for help when needed, because I don't want to be a burden to other people. And so I recognize that in myself though, and I challenge myself to try to say, okay, let's try to connect a little bit. There are people in your life who want to hear about what's going on and who can support you. But I think that the old avoidant attachment styles coping strategy would just be to isolate when I'm stressed.
Yeah. I do that still, in highly stressful times, just with withdraw and isolate. And in some capacity, I find it to be healthy because that gives me my space to decompress and get to a stage. But
right.
At a pure coping level, it's let me do this by myself. It's almost like my own therapy right now. It's entering so much about my life, including my early days of dating, right? Why those relationships did not work out, which had a lot to do with me sort of running away from intimacy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you on that. And also maybe even getting into relationships with people who might not ask so much of you, possibly, so that you didn't really have to kind of like actually like for a little while, I felt like, having a long distance relationship was like the perfect relationship for me. because, I could just really dip in and dip out of that relationship in my own comfort. But yeah, I think we all find our ways, to kind of heal and to recognize that, but also knowing that. And what you said too about balance, sometimes going into yourself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's only when you overuse it, because I think I need that time to figure out what it is that I need in the moment first. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, my first marriage was a long distance marriage, and it was great until we moved in together. And then it was like, oh no. But we were
right. You're
very
like, okay,
young.
now this is all the stuff that's going on that I didn't address earlier.
Correct, right? We should have done this podcast 25 years ago, right?
Right.
All right. So first is insecure. The first insecure attachment is called anxious. The second is avoidant. What is avoidant attachment?
Avoidant attachment is a person who generally values their independence and self-reliance a lot. They're kind of these quintessential lone wolves. Interestingly, it's also one of the reasons why they're looked up to by a lot of people in their lives, because they tend to overachieve. They're perfectionists, but they kind of hide sometimes in their achievements. They have some difficulty trusting others, forming close emotional bonds. When people are too emotional around them, that tends to make them uncomfortable. And they may sometimes seem emotionally distant or dismissive of others as well as their own emotional needs. And I think that there's a struggle to open up to others, because when they were younger, they were burned essentially when they communicated those needs. So, one piece of it is that sometimes they had caregivers who were not as available, or maybe even emotionally distant or dismissive when the child tried to communicate an emotional need, right? So that leads the child to suppress their emotions. Also, experiencing rejection or criticism from their caregivers will lead to that sense of, I don't want to be vulnerable ever again, because that was very hurtful to me when my own parent or an important adult in my life gave me that message. I also think that avoidant attachment can happen when, as a child, you were asked to step up a little too soon, like you were a parentified child, given big responsibilities when you were still little. Almost like the star child of the family, but that was the reason why people gave you support. So, okay, you were the most supported and loved when you won the award or like won the game for your team. But when that didn't happen, your parents were less connected to you. So it's almost like you start to associate that you have to keep doing things to get that love and support from others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense when you think about the work that Brene Brown has done around vulnerability, right? Why it was so impactful for the time that it was, which is people need to learn this. And, I think there's a major problem in the world right now with people not being able to be vulnerable. I think it has a lot to do with the conflict that we're in. And it's interesting, the name avoidant, because one of the models I teach around conflict is just it's called conflict handling modes, and there's different styles, but one of them is called the avoidance style, right? Avoidant behavior. And the definition of it is, from a conflict standpoint, it creates a lose-lose situation, right? In some cases, we might be better just in the argument and the fight, but the avoidant is the worst one out of them all. And I can see how that might be true to this concept as well. So if we would have to rate the insecure attachments, and this might just be an opinion and subjective, but which is worse, anxious or avoidance, or the combination of both?
Yeah, I think it's probably subjective depending on who you're talking to, right? Like, I feel like the anxious person would find that the avoidant person is their nightmare, and vice versa, because the anxious person is going to be more likely to ask for too much from the avoidant person's perspective. And so, and then the anxious person is saying, well, why are you always being rejecting when I'm just trying to get close to you? And of course, that's the most common combination in relationships. And partially, I think it's because you're trying to search for that something that you didn't get as a child, right? So the avoidant person they kind of want an anxious attached, individual in some ways, because like there's a lot of validation there, but then they start to ask for too much emotional disclosure and they can't handle it. And then the anxious person keeps trying to do the same thing over and over again to get reassurance from somebody who might not give it to them, which might remind them of a primary caregiver in childhood.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the concept isolating and fusing, which is in an intimate relationship, the way we can resolve the argument is by, if you're an isolator or if you're a fuser, by meeting that need and therefore the argument. So obviously the isolator is leave me alone, right? Which is I need to walk away, right? And sometimes that's done in a negative way, which is it's the avoidance attachment, which is the removal. And then there's the fuser, right? Which is no. We cannot let this go until we have discussed, resolved, been affectionate, right? Apologized. And the joke is the fuser meets the isolator meets the fuser. They decide to get married, what destroys and what becomes the major frustration for them later in the relationship, right? They never want to talk about shit, and this one always wants to talk about shit. So
so true. Yep.
Right?
And it's like, okay, where do you find the middle ground, you know?
Correct. And I'm thinking as because I learned that concept a while ago, and I'm like, I never actually really asked where it came from. But the more I've been talking about this concept of attachment science and theory, the more it makes sense to those two, avoidant and anxious, right?
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
When we get the combination of both, so we get the combination of anxious and avoidant, it's called disorganized, correct?
Yes.
All right. So explain that one to us.
So disorganized, oftentimes I think people say that it's a combination, but I think as I'm doing more work around it, seeing my patients, doing the research, I see that it's kind of its own style. I think the reason why it sort of got this name that it was the combination is because there's truly people who walk around as combination types. So this may be something that we haven't totally touched on yet, but I think that everybody wants to try to fit cleanly into one category. And it would be nice for just simplicity, but it's really not that simple. Human beings aren't simple. And I think most people are walking around with a combined type. So when people say, well, I have a mix of avoidant and anxious, I think that that's very possible. It's very common. And that could develop because you had a more avoidant attachment to your mom, and then you had a more anxious attachment to your grandmother or something like that. And then that can result in these kind of combined types. Disorganized attachment for the longest time was a big mystery in the attachment world because even the researchers didn't really know what they were. Like these early studies in the 60s, they're like, I don't know. These are all the people that kind of don't fit into one box. So we'll put them into this box called disorganized. Also a terrible name.
It is a terrible name.
Yeah, it's like so shaming. And also it's like, well, we don't know how to label you, which is kind of, it's even worse than getting a label maybe. Right. But I think really the defining feature of the person who's disorganized attached is that they don't have a sense of safety pretty much ever. So they're constantly in fight or flight. They can't really have a consistent coping strategy to emotionally regulate. And as a result, it's very hard to self-actualize. I mean, you're constantly in that bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs 90% of the time. So how can you even think about belonging or self-esteem needs or self-actualization? You can't. So for these people, they have a hard time being in consistent relationships. They tend to have a lot of difficulty having like one consistent way of acting in different situations. And so the people that are in relationships with them are very confused. They don't really know how to kind of get the best out of you either. And there's a lot of ambivalence too. I love you. I hate you. You know, I don't know what I want. Okay, never mind. Please don't leave me. I'm still here. I still love you. You know, it's so confusing. You don't really know how to deal with them. And this is usually a result of a childhood that was super chaotic, probably involved elements of trauma, neglect, abuse, sometimes coming from the parents and family members, sometimes outside. Maybe they were just severely bullied, for example, or even when you lose a parent too early, like a parent dies when you're still really young. I mean, that's a significant trauma that most children don't have to deal with, right? And so I think that as a result, they develop this idea, the world is not safe, and I don't know how to make it safe. And I think that explains a lot of their behaviors in adulthood.
Does the research show that like one attachment style, insecure specifically, falls more towards males versus females?
I think that culturally, we tend to create, if we're going to talk about insecure attachments in general, we're going to create more males that are avoidant and more females that are anxious. And obviously, it's cultural upbringing. Like, what do we tell most boys? Like, don't cry, stop crying, you know, like stop being a baby, right? When girls cry, you don't necessarily say that. And also you sometimes encourage your daughters, the girls in your life, well, go check on mom and see what she's doing. Like, make sure she's okay, right? So you encourage that caretaking, slightly codependent behavior from a young age. And it's so funny because I have my own toddler right now, and I'm constantly trying to be really cognizant. I mean, obviously, because I'm doing this work, my book.
Because you're an expert, so like, and you wrote a book.
Oh my God. So it's like, it's constantly top of mind. But like, my parents, I will hear my parents saying to my son, don't cry. And I'll like run out there, right? When I'm working from home, I'll run out there and be like, you can cry if you want to, you know, like, it's so funny. Like maybe I'm overdoing it slightly, but I'm also thinking about my parents were a little bit dismissive of my feelings when I was growing up. And I think that there's cultural roots there too. Like, yes, I'm a female, but also in Asian culture, it's really valued to be stoic. Like you're not supposed to have negative emotional expression. Exactly. So like, I feel like I'm constantly trying to like find a balance of like, okay, you know what? It's okay. Like they're going to say what they're going to say. It's fine.
Well, the good news is if you mess up the kid a little bit, right? It's normal, right? Because we all do.
We're all gonna. Right? That's right. You're not gonna be a perfect parent ever. So
correct.
Just let go of that.
Yeah. I wonder if there is merit to a little bit of that, in quotations, old school type of parenting, which is, suck it up and don't cry and rub some dirt on it. And I know it sounds wrong because it's what we're talking about is actually, it is all that behavior, parental negative behavior that creates these insecure attachment styles.
Right.
But is there a case where it doesn't, even though one does grow up with that type of parenting and that type of experience, is there potential for someone to not be, jeopardized, messed up, or develop an insecure attachment style?
Yeah. And I think this is where that nature and nurture combination comes from. There are certain temperaments, certain personality styles that are maybe more resilient to certain types of parenting than others, right? And so obviously, nobody is going to say, I really got the exact same upbringing as my sibling. And that part of that is because each of you guys are bringing to the table a different temperament. But for the most part, I usually don't see siblings who turn out exactly the same, even if their personalities are pretty similar. It's like, you know what? You can have two super outgoing siblings, and for some reason, one person responds a little bit better to the parenting style of their parents than the other. And one person has secure attachment and one has insecure. Why? There's still slight changes to how parents are responding. And also people have different relationships with their kids, right? So it's like, I mean, I think most parents would say, no, I love my children all equally, but that's not the truth. I mean, that's sad to say, but it's just
totally different.
Like,
totally different.
You sometimes like just feel like I jive better with this one kid. They get me more, or like, yeah, I do have a little bit more of a favoritism toward my daughter because she's my little princess or whatever, right? I mean, so those things do create some differences.
You've just described my home. Like, I mean, my relationship with my daughter is different than my son, and vice versa with my wife, and, the joke is like, she'll say like, she's a little version of me and I know what she's thinking. And I'm like, I know what this little guy's thinking. All right. Right. And what we end up resenting and becoming frustrated with is the reflection that we see of ourselves and our children. Right. Exactly. And, the work I do around personality, learned this a while ago, which is you've got this personality, this genetic personality that you're born with. And then depending on the nurturance, you're developing properly to that blueprint or improperly. And the great example that you just gave was siblings, right? Same home, same parents, but two different personalities, right? All right. Exactly. What are some things that we can do to manage, improve, break the pattern of this insecure attachment? Let's say I recognize, you know what? Listen to the show right now. I recognize that I'm disorganized because I'm both. I'm anxious and I'm avoidant, depending on the situation. And I want to be mindful of that. And I'm aware of it right now. I'm going to do some work. What are practices, tools, frameworks? How do we start to move from an insecure attachment to a secure attachment?
Yeah, well, first of all, is notice that your attachment styles are foundational to the development of your self-talk, right? So this ability to talk to ourselves, to have thoughts about what we're doing, to, fast forward to the future, go back into the past. It's what has led us to the top of the food chain. It's both our greatest achievement and our biggest downfall, right? Because it's also what propagates anxiety and depression and shame and all these things that actually cause so much difficulty in us trying to move forward in our lives. And so just understanding that attachment styles essentially develops a certain set of self-talk statements. There's a prototypical self-talk that is associated with each type. And that then goes into how you feel and how you behave in a variety of situations, and then feeds back on your self-talk and probably makes it stronger and reinforces it. So first, notice the negative self-talk that is usually associated with each insecure attachment style. And in my book, I talk about the different statements that each attachment style tends to have. So for example, if you have anxious attachment, your self-talk probably involves things like, I need to rescue everyone, I fear being by myself, I have to analyze everything, and so forth. Avoidantly attached people, I'm only as good as my last achievement. I must be in control at all times, and I keep others at arm's length. And then disorganized attachment, I can't control my emotions. My life is in constant chaos and I deserve to suffer. So knowing how this negative self-talk is wreaking a havoc on your life is piece number one. And the second thing is then like, how do we shift that self-talk? How do we change our brain's operating system? Well, it's really through acknowledging the pains and the hurts and the unmet needs in your childhood and finding a way for your adult self to start to give that to your child self. So this work is called reparenting. This is not a new psychological concept, but I think it's been misunderstood and also underutilized. So in my book, I talk about how do we practically reparent, right? How do we take this reparenting idea, which may sound like a woo-woo concept to people, but actually make it practical and concrete in your daily life? What does that actually look like?
And when you say reparenting your inner child, or just reparenting in a different way with your children?
Reparenting your inner child first, and then the reparenting of your children is going to kind of follow much more naturally, right? It's really important that you develop a secure attachment to yourself first, because that's going to be then the foundational relationship that you use to emulate to the other aspects of your life that need that support. And so whether it's having more secure attachments with other people or starting to believe in yourself more and going for the career that you always wanted, it all starts with you being able to parent your inner child first and showing your inner child what a secure attachment actually looks like.
Well, life could be pretty simple, right? There's tools from psychologists out there that can tell you exactly what to do to how to mend and, develop new patterns, right? Develop new neurological connections and new pathways.
Yeah,
super cool.
Definitely.
I could spend the next 5 hours with you picking your brain. But I know we're coming to the top of the show, or top of the hour. At the end of the episode, we asked the Better Human question. But before we go there, for the audience, if they want to learn more about Dr. Judy, if they wanted to follow you, if they wanted to, check out your website, where do they go and get more from Dr. Judy, and where could they find your book, and how could they learn more about some of your other services?
Oh, well, thank you so much. And it's been so awesome talking to you. Like the time just totally flew by. It's amazing. So thanks for the insightful conversation. You can find more about me on my social at Dr. Judy Ho. Instagram is my primary platform, or you can go to my website and sign up for my newsletter. I often give lots of free resources out both on my website and through my newsletter at drjudyho.com.
That's awesome. For the audience, we're going to have all that in the show notes. So if you didn't catch it now, we'll have it there, but super easy. Dr. Judy Ho, you're going to find her everywhere. I started following you recently. I love your channel, and the messaging. All right. So at the end of the episode, as mentioned, most important question, which is, what do you think we all need to do to be better humans tomorrow?
Great question. And I would say to have more self-compassion. So much of our judgment of other people comes from us judging ourselves. So if we can start with just giving a little bit of grace to ourselves when we make mistakes, or as we reflect on our past behaviors that we're not proud of, that's going to radiate out to everybody else, and you're going to show them a way to pay it forward too.
That's excellent. Excellent. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and share. Go and smash those stars. Give us some ratings. It helps get the episode out there even further. If you're not following Dr. Judy, go and jump on Instagram and check out her website as well. And as usual, stay happy, stay healthy, and we will see you next week.